Coevolution is the process of reciprocal evolutionary change that occurs between pairs of species, or among groups of species, as they interact with one another. The activity of each species that participates in the interaction applies selection pressure on the others. In a predator-prey interaction, for example, the emergence of faster prey may select against individuals in the predatory species who are unable to keep pace. Thus, only fast individuals, or those with adaptations allowing them to capture prey using other means, will pass their genes to the next generation. Coevolution is one of the primary methods by which biological communities are organized. It can lead to very specialized relationships between species, such as those between pollinator and plant, between predator and prey, and between parasite and host. It may also foster the evolution of new species in cases where individual populations of interacting species separate themselves from their greater metapopulations for long periods of time. Coevolution does not necessarily require the presence of antagonism. The interactions, or characteristics within groups of unrelated species, may converge to allow individual species to exploit valuable resources or enjoy increased protection. Once an interaction evolves between two species, other species within the community may develop traits akin to those integral to the interaction, whereby new species enter into the interaction. This type of convergence of species has occurred commonly in the evolution of mutualistic interactions, including those between pollinators, such as bees, and plants, and those between vertebrates, such as birds and bats, and fruits. Some of the species drawn into mutualistic interactions become co-mutualists, contributing as well as benefiting from the relationship, whereas others become cheaters that only exploit the relationship. In many interactions between bee pollinators and plants, bees collect the nectar from the reproductive parts of the plant, and are often dusted with pollen in the process. When the bees fly to another plant of the same species, they may fertilize the plant by depositing pollen on the plant's stigma. In contrast, some bumblebees, such as those of Bombus terrestris, obtain nectar from the plant, without picking up or dropping off pollen. They cheat by cutting through other parts of the plant, instead of entering the flower. In other cases, the behavior or appearance of several species may converge to enhance their mutual protection. For example, several species of heliconid butterflies that are distasteful to predators have evolved to resemble one another. In addition, one species may evolve to mimic the behavior or appearance of another to garner some of the same protections enjoyed by the model species. This evolutionary strategy has been successful for non-venomous snakes, such as the scarlet king snake, Lampropeltis triangulum ellipsoides, whose coloration closely resembles that of coral snakes, which can deliver a poisonous bite. Now, considering coevolution in various levels, number 1 is mutualism. Coevolution is the evolution of two or more species, which reciprocally affect each other, sometimes creating a mutualistic relationship between the species. Such relationships can be of many different types. Insects and insect-pollinated flowers. Modern insect-pollinated, entomophilous, flowers are conspicuously co-adapted with insects to ensure pollination, and in return to reward the pollinators with nectar and pollen. The two groups have co-evolved for over 100 million years, creating a complex network of interactions. Either they evolved together, or at some later stages they came together, likely with pre-adaptations, and became mutually adapted. Several highly successful insect groups, especially the Hymenoptera, wasps, bees, and ants, and Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, as well as many types of Diptera, flies, and Coleoptera, beetles, evolved in conjunction with flowering plants during the Cretaceous, 145 to 66 million years ago. The earliest bees, important pollinators today, appeared in the early Cretaceous. A group of wasps sister to the bees evolved at the same time as flowering plants, as did the Lepidoptera. Further, all the major clades of bees first appeared between the Middle and Late Cretaceous, simultaneously with the adaptive radiation of the eudicots, 3/4 of all angiosperms, and at the time when the angiosperms became the world's dominant plants on land. At least 3 aspects of flowers appear to have co-evolved between flowering plants and insects, because they involve communication between these organisms. Firstly, flowers communicate with their pollinators by scent. Insects use this scent to determine how far away a flower is, to approach it, and to identify where to land, and finally to feed. Secondly, flowers attract insects with patterns of stripes leading to the rewards of nectar and pollen, and colors such as blue and ultraviolet, to which their eyes are sensitive. In contrast, bird-pollinated flowers tend to be red or orange. Thirdly, flowers such as some orchids mimic females of particular insects, deceiving males into pseudocopulation. The yucca, Yucca whipple, is pollinated exclusively by Ticula maculata, a yucca moth that depends on the yucca for survival. The moth eats the seeds of the plant, while gathering pollen. The pollen has evolved to become very sticky, and remains on the mouth parts when the moth moves to the next flower. The yucca provides a place for the moth to lay its eggs, deep within the flower away from potential predators. Birds and bird-pollinated flowers. Hummingbirds, and ornithophilous, bird-pollinated, flowers, have evolved a mutualistic relationship. The flowers have nectar, suited to the bird's diet, their color suits the bird's vision, and their shape fits that of the bird's bills. The blooming times of the flowers have also been found to coincide with hummingbirds' breeding seasons. The floral characteristics of ornithophilous plants vary greatly among each other, compared to closely related insect-pollinated species. These flowers also tend to be more ornate, complex, and showy than their insect-pollinated counterparts. It is generally agreed that plants formed coevolutionary relationships with insects first, and ornithophilous species diverged at a later time. There is not much scientific support for instances of the reverse of this divergence. From ornithophily to insect pollination. The diversity in floral phenotype in ornithophilous species, and the relative consistency observed in bee-pollinated species, can be attributed to the direction of the shift in pollinator preference. Flowers have converged to take advantage of similar birds. Flowers compete for pollinators, and adaptations reduce unfavorable effects of this competition. The fact that birds can fly during inclement weather makes them more efficient pollinators where bees and other insects would be inactive. Ornithophily may have arisen for this reason in isolated environments, with poor insect colonization, or areas with plants, which flower in the winter. Bird-pollinated flowers usually have higher volumes of nectar, and higher sugar production than those pollinated by insects. This meets the bird's high energy requirements, the most important determinants of flower choice. In Mimulus, an increase in red pigment in petals and flower nectar volume noticeably reduces the proportion of pollination by bees, as opposed to hummingbirds, while greater flower surface area increases bee pollination. Therefore, red pigments in the flowers of Mimulus cardinalis may function primarily to discourage bee visitation. In Penstemon, flower traits that discourage bee pollination may be more influential on the flower's evolutionary change than pro-bird adaptations, but adaptation towards birds and away from bees can happen simultaneously. However, some flowers such as Heliconia angusta appear not to be as specifically ornithophilous as had been supposed. The species is occasionally visited by trigonostingless bees. These bees are largely pollen robbers in this case, but may also serve as pollinators. Fig reproduction and fig wasps. The genus Ficus is composed of 800 species of vines, shrubs, and trees, including the cultivated fig, defined by their syconiums, the fruit-like vessels, that either hold female flowers or pollen on the inside. Each fig species has its own fig wasp, which, in most cases, pollinates the fig, so a tight mutual dependence has evolved and persisted throughout the genus. Next level is the hosts and parasites. Brood parasites. Brood parasitism demonstrates close coevolution of host and parasite, for example in some cuckoos. These birds do not make their own nests, but lay their eggs in nests of other species, ejecting, or killing the eggs, and young of the host, and, thus having a strong negative impact on the host's reproductive fitness. Their eggs are camouflaged as eggs of their hosts, implying that hosts can distinguish their own eggs from those of intruders, and are in an evolutionary arms race with the cuckoo between camouflage and recognition. Cuckoos are counter-adapted to host defenses with features such as thickened eggshells, shorter incubation, so their young hatch first, and flat backs adapted to lift eggs out of the nest. Parasites and sexually reproducing hosts. Host-parasite coevolution is the coevolution of a host and a parasite. A general characteristic of many viruses, as obligate parasites, is that they co-evolved alongside their respective hosts. Correlated mutations between the two species enter them into an evolution arms race. Whichever organism, host, or parasite that cannot keep up with the other will be eliminated from their habitat, as the species with the higher average population fitness survives. This race is known as the Red Queen hypothesis. The Red Queen hypothesis predicts that sexual reproduction allows a host to stay just ahead of its parasite, similar to the Red Queen's race. The host reproduces sexually, producing some offspring with immunity over its parasite, which then evolves in response. The parasite-host relationship probably drove the prevalence of sexual reproduction over the more efficient asexual reproduction. It seems that when a parasite infects a host, sexual reproduction affords a better chance of developing resistance through variation in the next generation, giving sexual reproduction variability for fitness not seen in the asexual reproduction, which produces another generation of the organism susceptible to infection by the same parasite. Coevolution between host and parasite may accordingly be responsible for much of the genetic diversity seen in normal populations, including blood plasma polymorphism, protein polymorphism, and histocompatibility systems. Antagonistic coevolution. Antagonistic coevolution is seen in the harvester ant species, Pagonomyrmex barbatus, and Pagonomyrmex rugosus, in a relationship both parasitic and mutualistic. The queens are unable to produce worker ants by mating with their own species. Only by crossbreeding can they produce workers. The winged females act as parasites for the males of the other species, as their sperm will only produce sterile hybrids. But because the colonies are fully dependent on these hybrids to survive, it is also mutualistic. While there is no genetic exchange between the species, they are unable to evolve in a direction where they become too genetically different, as this would make crossbreeding impossible. Next level is the predator and prey. Predators and prey interact and co-evolve. The predator to catch the prey more effectively, the prey to escape. The coevolution of the two mutually imposes selective pressures. These often lead to an evolutionary arms race between prey and predator, resulting in anti-predator adaptations. The same applies to herbivores, animals that eat plants, and the plants that they eat. Paul R. Ehrlich and Peter H. Raven in 1964 proposed the theory of escape and radiate coevolution to describe the evolutionary diversification of plants and butterflies. In the Rocky Mountains, red squirrels and crossbills, seed-eating birds, compete for seeds of the lodgepole pine. The squirrels get at pine seeds by gnawing through the cone scales, whereas the crossbills get at the seeds by extracting them with their unusual crossed mandibles. In areas where there are squirrels, the lodgepole's cones are heavier and have fewer seeds and thinner scales, making it more difficult for squirrels to get at the seeds. Conversely, where there are crossbills, but no squirrels, the cones are lighter in construction, but have thicker scales, making it more difficult for crossbills to get at the seeds. The lodgepole's cones are in an evolutionary arms race with the two kinds of herbivore. Coevolution is a complex process that occurs on many levels. It may appear in situations where one species interacts closely with several others, such as the interaction between European cuckoos and the other species whose nests they parasitize. It may involve many species, as in relationships between fruit-bearing plants and birds, or it may take place in some subgroups of species, but not others. It is important to note that human activities often disrupt the process of coevolution by changing the nature and the extent of the interactions between co-evolving species. Some examples of harmful human activities include habitat fragmentation, increased hunting pressure, favoritism of one species over another, and the introduction of exotic species into ecosystems that are ill-equipped to handle them. If you find this video useful, please like and share. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Happy day.